And it's time now for the big question, in which you get to quiz top celebrities, public figures, decision makers and sports people via GB Views at gbnews.com. Tonight, my very special guest has a big personality, a big vision, and has had a big impact on the lives of thousands of young people that have passed through her doors. Katharine Birbalsingh, CBE, is a British education reformer and head teacher. She's the founder and head teacher at Michaela Community School, a free school established in northwest London in 2014. The government's free schools programme was condemned at the time by Labour as an expensive vanity project, but Michaela Community School has been anything but. Rigorous discipline at the school includes a strict uniform code. Crikey, better sort out my tie. No jewellery, not even ear studs, regulation shoes and regulation pencil cases, and a behaviour boot camp in the first week of school so that pupils know what is expected of them. Demerits are given out for the slightest errors, forgetting a pen, slouching or turning to look out of the window during a lesson. I honestly don't think I would last more than 3 seconds in this woman's classroom. Katharine received a standing ovation at the 2010 Conservative Party conference and alienated much of the teaching profession when she said the system is broken because it keeps poor children poor. She went on to condemn a culture of excuses, of low standards, the chaos of our classrooms, and a sea of bureaucracy. Politically neutral herself, merely describing herself as a small c conservative, Katharine Birbalsingh was clearly put on this earth to educate children, to draw the best out of them academically, creatively and in sport, and to give them the best set of tools with which to fulfil their talents and have a happy, successful life. In 2017, Sir Anthony Seldon, the British educator and historian, listed Katharine in the 20 most influential figures in British education. And in 2019, she was awarded the Contrarian Prize, which promotes the contribution of non-conformist thinking. Oh, and she became a Commander of the Order of the British Empire in the 2020 birthday honours. Well, we're honoured to welcome Katharine Birbalsingh, CBE. Hi, Katharine.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Your father was a teacher and your grandfather. It's in the blood.
Yes, I suppose so.
And did your father pass down his teaching philosophy to you?
No, although it was nice when I showed him our reading list for what we would be doing in our English lessons at school. And he said it very much, he grew up in British Guyana, and he said it very much reminded him, apart from a few modern texts, it reminded him very much of what he had learned at school. And seeing as he's in his 80s now, I take that as a bit of a compliment, really. I think that too often these days we abandon the text from the past at our peril, really. So yeah, that made me very happy when he said that.
Are certain people suited to teaching? Are teachers born or are they taught?
I think both, really. There are some people where it's obvious that they should be teachers. They love leading in the classroom. They have bundles of personality, and so they can really kind of take charge. Others you have to support more, but that's all right. It would be, I think actually it's one of the big travesties of the education system at the moment, which is that only those people who were clearly born to do this and have oodles of energy in front of the class are able to really cope with the current system. And if you're a little bit more shy or a bit more academic, if there aren't the kinds of systems there to support you properly, then you'll kind of be eaten alive in some of our schools. And that shouldn't be the case, because by definition, you cannot fill 23,000 schools with these exuberant characters who are able to just dazzle the children all the time. Sometimes you're going to have a whole variety of different teachers. And the system ought to be supportive enough to allow any number of different people to teach and teach well.
And when you're recruiting teachers, which is perhaps the most important role of a head teacher, do you look for qualifications? Do you look for a skill set or a philosophy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, well, for us, partly the philosophy is a big deal, but to a certain extent, it's self-selecting. So the people who apply sort of kind of know what we're about. But I, in all of my interviews with staff, always say, potential staff, today isn't just about us figuring out whether we want you. It's about you figuring out whether you want us. And I'm very particular about telling them the kinds of things they might not like. And then I say, okay, go around the school today. Imagine yourself in the shoes of the teachers, standing in front of the class. Is this the sort of thing that you're going to be happy doing? For instance, would you feel deeply uncomfortable giving a child a detention for not having a pen? And if you do feel uncomfortable with that, this might not be a place you want to be. And so I'm really clear with them at the beginning, because I want them to be happy and to be able to take part. But then also I would say something that people underestimate in teaching as a skill, as a thing, which is you have to be really clever. To be a good teacher, you really need to be clever. And so that's one of the things that I'm looking for: spark, street smarts, the ability to think on the spot and make quick decisions, the ability to see things through, persevere, working hard. That's another thing that you want teachers, because teachers, they really do need to give a lot during term times. It's sort of feast and famine with teaching. I think people assume that teachers work from 9 till 3. It most definitely isn't the case. So you need them to love kids. I mean, that's a key thing. You know, they need to love kids. They need to really want to change their lives for the better, and to understand. I think people often mistake, in the West, they don't understand so much that the kind of impact parents and teachers can have on their child, that depending on how you raise them and what happens at school, the influence of their peers and of the adults around them, that they will literally become different people as they grow up. I think they understand this very much in the East. I think in the West, we sort of think, oh, well, you're born the way that you're born, and that's just the way that it is. And it's just not true, you know. Children transform depending on the adults leading them in their lives. And if you have a number of disadvantaged children, then the school and the teachers in it play such an important role in giving those children what they might not have at home.
Yes, children transform for the better or for the worse, depending on the environment that they inhabit and the influence that they receive. And I love, having researched your career, your message to parents, which is that they're part of this process of educating the child. I think you were quoted as saying that parents should just take the view that anything that's learnt at school is a bonus, and that the burden is upon them to make sure that their children get all of the educational resources that they require. Now, you were born in Auckland, New Zealand, but you grew up mostly in Canada, in Toronto, but you moved to Britain at 15. Did your childhood shape your philosophy towards education?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's funny because I call myself a small C conservative, and like any young teacher, you know, you've been through university, you're very much a sort of lefty, and then I changed my mind over the years in teaching because of the things that I would see and sort of what worked and what didn't in terms of values. And I do think to myself, well, why did I return to those small C conservative values? And I suppose it was my upbringing. My parents from the Caribbean. I think a lot of Caribbean families are naturally small C conservative. And so I was brought up in a household where I didn't really think about it at the time, obviously. And my parents are very much on the left and are politically to the left. But in terms of our household and the kinds of what we valued as important, I think that's why later on in life, I've just sort of kind of reverted to that, because I was brought up in a small C conservative household.
So what are the founding principles of Michaela, the school that you run?
Yeah, so, well, very much. You've spoken about the discipline, and people might, you know, take offense at that. But I mean, it's not, you said something about staring out the window. You know, if they're staring out the window for long periods of time, you know, and they've been warned a few times and so on, and they're not paying attention, then yes, they would end up with a demerit and possibly even a detention. But what that does is the children never stare out the window. You know, they don't forget their pens. They're always engaged with the learning. It changes the culture of the classroom. What people underestimate is the power of culture, and how if you have a number of children who are slouched in their chairs and don't really care and aren't particularly polite, then that is infectious. And then children who were polite and who did sit up straight will no longer sit up straight. And it encourages everybody to race to the bottom. Whereas if you have a couple of demerits handed out here and there, I mean, and sometimes in many lessons, no demerits are handed out. And that's because the culture of the school is one of children expecting the very best of themselves. And they love it for that reason. They know that they can do it, and they like the fact that we hold them to account for that. So there's the discipline. Then there's the teaching methods, where the adult is very much the authority in the classroom who is leading the learning. In the last 40 to 50 years, child-centered learning has become a thing. So people might not really understand that. They think, well, of course the teacher's leading, who else would be? Well, actually, in lots of classrooms these days, it's the children. So the children will be, in other schools, are on grouped desks, and the children lead themselves. And the teacher is sort of a facilitator of learning who passes amongst the desks, keeping them on task. Whereas at Michaela, the teacher is the authority. And of course, this is the case in other schools too. But what you'll find is that at Michaela, it's across the board. All of the desks are in rows. All of the teachers are leading the learning. Whereas elsewhere, you'll find a few teachers who are sort of rebelling against this and are doing that as being more traditionalist, whereas we are all traditionalists. And that's because we believe the teacher knows more than the child. It's the teacher who ought to be giving their knowledge to the child and helping them then to do something with it. And so it doesn't mean you don't analyze. It doesn't mean you don't manipulate it and have conversations. You can turn to your partner between each other or the children, to discuss something, and then you feed it back to the class. You can have class discussions. But it does mean that the teacher is in charge rather than the children. And then other things that we do are values. So we teach the children gratitude. We believe in a sense of personal responsibility. If they don't do their homework, we're holding them to account for it. And of course we should. And we'll hold parents to account. I always say to the parents, look, we will deliver on our side. I promise you an excellent education with excellent, committed teachers who are giving their all. But then I expect the parents to make sure that they're turning up to school on time, in the proper uniform, bag packed the night before with all their equipment inside it, with the homework complete. That is for the parent to help the child with. And as you said about the parents just thinking of what they learn at school as a bonus, I think nowadays, look, I believe in state education. It's great that we've got this wonderful, an education system for families in Britain. However, people mustn't then assume that as parents, it's not their role to teach their child. First of all, your child doesn't start school until years after they were born, and you should have been teaching them from the moment that they were born. You should be reading to them. You should be talking to them. Too often parents sort of think, oh, well, it's a little toddler. They don't speak much, so I'm not going to speak to them. It is absolutely the most crucial time from 0 to 5. You need to be talking to them, answering for them if they can't answer back yet, counting the peas on the plate, counting the houses as you walk along. Eventually, once they know how to count by ones, you count by twos and count by threes. And that way, when they later have to learn their times tables, they're steps ahead. You can even teach your child to read before they start school. And what parents sometimes don't realize is that there are some children who start school knowing how to read and others who have no idea. And of course, who's ahead then? The ones whose parents at home taught them how to read. So it's important throughout their school career, even at secondary school, because we have a secondary school, I encourage parents to sit down and read physically with their child next to them. And for children who don't like reading, you can read one paragraph out loud, they read another paragraph out loud. The other thing I want to hold parents to account on, smartphones. Don't give your child a smartphone. Because if you do, later on in life, when you say, oh, well, he never really took to reading, didn't really take to maths, you have only yourself to blame, because a book cannot compete with a smartphone. A book is flat, black and white. A smartphone, lots of colors, explosions, all sorts of nonsense. And frankly, parents, you don't know what your child is doing on the internet if you let them go on there unsupervised. So that is, look, I know how it's really hard. And sometimes parents think, oh, I just need to give them something to do. And you use it as a bit of a babysitter. But I promise you, I'm begging you, please don't give them unsupervised access to the internet. They are in such danger. All sorts of people know where your child lives, knows where they go to school, how they get to school, what their favorite things are to do, their friends. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Give them books instead and spend time bonding with them so you can read together.
So many questions coming in, Katharine. Jeanette on Facebook asks, what do you think of politics taking over our schools?
Yeah, well, we don't do that at Michaela, but I do worry, especially with the influence of America, the things that I hear that goes on in classrooms there. It is worrying. And, I think it's our role as teachers to instill children with the sorts of values that are going to make them successful in life. And if instead we are too influenced by our own political ideas, and we try and kind of insist that the children take on those political ideas, that's problematic. I think, sadly, sometimes there are some teachers who feel that it's their job to try and make children into rebels. They want them to be to reject the status quo and to go out there and be rebellious. And that's great. I don't have a problem with that. For our children, I don't have a problem with children being rebels. What I mean is, at our school, some children will become dentists and some children will become radicals. And that's great. I want them to be able to have the whole spectrum of choices in front of them for what they're going to be. But sometimes I do think some teachers can lose their way, and they think that the point of school is to get children to rebel. And I don't think that's the point of school. And that question really drives to the heart of that. What is the point of school? And I think it is learning maths and English and history and geography and languages and science and so on. Like that. That's what I think.
And you've spoken out against extreme political correctness, Katharine, or so-called woke culture. We saw a directive from the Scottish government a few weeks ago that children in primary school could identify by different genders, irrespective of the wishes of their parents. And there is, of course, critical race theory, which would suggest that even a young child that's white is essentially somebody that's racist just because of the colour of their skin. And you've spoken out about these race issues. So what are your thoughts about critical race theory in an educational setting, and also that trans decision in Scotland?
Yeah, well, I think that parents are clearly a huge part of their lives, and that's mad as far as I'm concerned. Parents should know what's happening with their children, which is why I say don't give them unsupervised access to the internet and so on. They are the biggest part of a child's life, and as much as I believe in school and so on, the parents are the number one port of call for a child. With regard to race, obviously you want to talk about race issues. You want to make sure that black people and Indian people and all the kinds of people in history are part of that history that's being taught. So once upon a time, black people were whitewashed out of history, and they might not have been mentioned. For instance, when the Second World War once upon a time was taught, you wouldn't have mentioned the Caribbean soldiers and Indian soldiers who gave their lives for this country. But nowadays that isn't the case and shouldn't be the case. So that's important. However, when you say critical race theory, what you mean are things like the program on Channel 4 that came out a while ago, the school that tried to stop racism, where white children were being separated from the black children, and the white children were made to feel like they were the bad people and the black children were the good people. That is the stuff from kind of before civil rights in America or South Africa apartheid. I don't really understand how that's considered to be a good thing. All children are children. At our school, we have a whole variety of children of various religions and races and so on. They're all friends with each other. There just isn't an issue around that. And I would hate to make it an issue for the children and to highlight problems for them, because I want them to be able to go out in the world and get over any obstacles that might be in front of them because of the values of hard work, being kind, persevering, personal responsibility, all of that stuff that I want our children to be able to do.
Very briefly, the clock's against us, Katharine. We need 3 hours, frankly. It's a fascinating conversation, and you've done so much in the world of education. I'm going to get to our final question from Derek. Before I do, can I just ask you about the pandemic and about online learning? I know you're not a fan of it. And I want to ask you about the role of the teaching unions, who many speculate were behind the decision to close schools in the course of the pandemic, and also to require the wearing of masks for children in secondary school in the classroom. Do you have a view on the influence of the teaching unions on education in this country?
Well, sometimes I think they say the wrong things. Sometimes there are things that I would agree with. I think that, obviously they're trying to look after their members. Sometimes I have to say, especially their position on pedagogy, they're not looking after their members at all. And sometimes they deny the issues of behavior that go on in the classroom, which I find extraordinary because they're obviously not interested in their teachers at all when they do
Katharine, many of them don't want there to be exams. Many of them pushed for schools to be closed in the pandemic, masks in the classroom. I mean, for me, all of those policies are beyond the pale.
Yes, well, exams, I mean, that's, again, mad because teachers' lives were completely ruined by the fact that they were having to write their own exams. So, again, they don't have the teachers in mind for that. I mean, the thing is, we've got to remember that the unions are representing the interests of their teachers. So I can see why they might ask for masks to be on. Having said that, I mean, I'm not an expert on the science around this, so I can't really say. And I understand why the unions might say things to protect their members. I would simply point out that many of the things that they say are not protecting their members at all.
Katharine, final question, only a couple of seconds or I'll get in huge trouble with producer Tom. He'll give me a, what do we call it? Not a detention, but when you have to... There you go, I'm going to get in trouble. But look, here's the question. Do you believe that corporal punishment made children more respectful and better adults as a result? That's from Derek.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't believe in corporal punishment. I don't think anything like that is necessary when you have a system at school which has praise and punishment. So you've got merits and you've got demerits, and you've got order in the classroom and order in your corridors, and the children are polite to each other because you teach kindness and gratitude, which is what we do. I realize why some people might think it would be a good idea because they think, oh my goodness, there's such chaos. What are we going to do? We have to go back to corporal punishment. It really isn't necessary. All that's necessary is that there are some strict behavior systems that are centralized in the school and where all the teachers love the children, because love is very important here. You can't have the discipline without love. The children are on your side with the discipline when you love them. And that is really important. And I think too often, our detractors, for instance, think only love is what's important. You need love and discipline. And when you bring them together, the children are very grateful. All parents know this. All parents, all good parents know you love your children, but you also hold them to high standards. That's what it is to be a good teacher and a good parent, to do what's difficult, as we say at Michaela, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult, you do the right thing.
Inspirational words. Katharine Birbalsingh, thank you so much for giving up your Saturday evening. I know that's precious downtime for any head teacher or teacher, but we really appreciate your time and huge congratulations on everything that you've achieved at Michaela, and may that continue for a long time into the future.